have known I was autistic, even after going through autistic burnout and depression and all these things, without having access to thousands of other late diagnosed and undiagnosed high massing autistics that are, what I would like to say, very similar to my type of autism, because I have access to that. And so being able to reach out to others and communicate, having like wonderful people like Devan who are knowledgeable from their own experience, plus probably a few thousand hours of research, because that's what we do when we look into something. It's just allowing for voices to be heard. And just as Shaw was saying, the diagnostic criteria for autism was for essentially my person, the young white boy. Granted, I wasn't rich, so my parents couldn't get the assessment or even recognize that I was hyperactive for certain reasons and stuff. There's very little research around minorities and women and people of color when it comes to the original autism, and likely most psychological and social research, just because of where the funding comes from. Um, yeah, so I just want to say, Devan, it's so great to have made a connection with you, and same with Shaw and Drip Lord, who are, dealing with their own neurodivergencies. And again, neurodivergent can be anything that is a developmental disability in your brain that you're born with, to CPTSD that you have lived through trauma, to environmental chemical imbalances in your brain that need medication. So it just means neurodivergent is a huge umbrella that could mean all sorts of different things. In social media, as people say neurodivergent, they're typically talking about autism and ADHD because those are the two developmental disabilities that you're born with that are divergent from the typical brain from birth and not necessarily caused or developed from trauma, such as a lot of different personality disorders and depression itself. So I appreciate so many people in this space who have just accepted one another and are amplifying each other's voices, and who've done research and who are planning to do research, or even just accepting that everyone's brain is different. And if you have something that you don't feel is right or that you need help with, being comfortable asking for that help, figuring out how to support yourself, it's important. So yeah.
Absolutely, man. Thank you. That both you guys have been, again, another huge help in today's conversation. And I know we're getting close to five, so we're not at the closing point, so I'm not rushing us to close. But I'm wondering if maybe we start talking now to see if there are other areas that you guys would really like to cover and talk about, because I'm open to go as long in exploring this conversation as many weeks as we need to, especially right now. So do you guys feel like there are other areas you'd really like to explore on this topic? Devan, please.
I just want to touch a little bit. I talk about it so much, and I talked about it a little bit last week, but Homer talked about CPTSD. And I talked a little bit last week about how we are more prone to abuse or assault as autistic individuals. Diagnosis can get even harder when trauma gets in the mix. And if you are, even if we look at, the poster child for diagnostic criteria, the little white boy who shows up with X, Y, and Z, he is still experiencing trauma. Hi, Homer. He is still experiencing trauma because he is going through a world in which he is marginalized because he is autistic. And that trauma muddies the water, and it makes it harder to communicate, and it makes it harder to function. you know, as a little girl who experienced things that unfortunately many little girls do and never should, I developed CPTSD from the age of 4. I developed dissociative disorders. Communicating was much harder for me. I was more likely to experience bouts of non-speaking. And I didn't understand why I was experiencing some of these things. And so if you look at diagnostic criteria, a number of these things coexist. A number of the criteria fall under a number of the diagnoses. Remember, when I was first diagnosed, I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, which is the worst kind of anxiety that you could have. And part of it was my sensory issues. So I can't, and if you watch my videos, you'll probably see, I can't wear sleeves. I can't do it. I own maybe one shirt with sleeves. I can't wear closed-toed shoes unless they're slip-ons, and they have to be easily taken off. And if I'm sitting at a table, they will immediately come off. And these are things that most people don't actively notice, but they become a part of every decision that I make every day. That was relevant, but I lost it. But the generalized anxiety, they were like, okay, well, so you're just really uncomfortable. When really I was experiencing sensory issues. There's evidence that suggests that, especially for women, but women have some of the highest experiences of trauma, the more trauma you experience, and as CPTSD develops, ADHD symptoms increase or show up. There are studies that should suggest that CPTSD causes ADHD symptoms, almost like, you get ADHD from CPTSD, which is weird, but, it's part of the story. Or, the sexual abuse that causes trauma causes hypersexuality, which could be CPTSD or bipolar, or it happens sometimes in autism. And so getting a diagnosis that fits can be really, really hard. But additionally, the majority of us, inherently we're all going to have trauma. But the majority of us have a number of diagnoses. I've probably got like 6 at this point that coexist. And that's why I talk about the spectrum, the neural spectrum, the neurodiversity spectrum. And it's almost impossible to determine which was the first. And, did this one cause this one? Or is this symptom from this? Or is this symptom from this? So understanding your own mental wellness as a neurodivergent person is a constantly evolving thing. And you have to constantly learn and understand and push forward into it. And you're going to pick up diagnoses along the way that you might lose in a few years or 10 years. Or, you might heal to the point where your symptoms aren't so much that diagnostically you might not qualify as having this illness anymore. That, so it's exhausting, but it's important for taking care of yourself and for continuing to heal. The label is not always the most important thing. It's understanding your needs.
Yeah, that was perfect right there. I feel like we could do a whole hour just on facts, statistics, and delving into the CPTSD. Excuse me, there was one of the things I struggled to pronounce, Kyle. CPTSD part of that, because I feel like that may be part of what triggered me getting into such a more, I don't even know how to describe the state, but me recognizing symptoms more and more frequently and more prevalently, especially trouble paying attention at all times. Sometimes I wonder if that's social media. Sometimes I wonder if that's recent trauma. Sometimes I wonder if that's been there forever. It's childhood trauma. There's so much I have to unpack, and I've had so many challenges just trying to get a counselor to connect with, to start working with on the trauma side of things, that I can understand what you were saying, Devin, about how it can be hard for somebody to get a diagnosis when you're already dealing with some trauma, because I find it hard enough to talk to medical professionals. I've had quite a few experiences with doctors that have led me to feel uncomfortable or unsafe in the presence of doctors. So, or anybody in the medical profession, or I often feel like they just don't care about me when I walk into the rooms. And maybe just the stories I'm telling myself, but it still doesn't help me when it's time for me to get medical assistance. So something like this, I can imagine what kind of nightmare it would be. And this is probably one of the reasons I'm dragging my feet on even thinking about trying to find a diagnosis or figure something out, because usually when I try and go these routes, I don't end up with the answers. I just end up with more frustrations and stress. Doesn't mean I'm giving up or quitting, but I can definitely relate. Devin, you have something you want to share? You'd like to say?
I just want to first validate your experience, and say secondly, that is a major problem with any doctor and with any mental health professional in receiving diagnosis, is that there's a lack of autism informed doctors, but there's also a lack of true trauma informed doctors who understand the impact of trauma. One quick example for me specifically, I've had 1 million doctors talk to me about my weight, but not one of them asked about my mental health or understood the adrenal impact of CPTSD, of constant fight or flight in your body, holding on to calories and sugar because it thinks that you're dying because you're in constant fight or flight, when in actuality you have CPTSD. So 100% valid, and finding doctors for everybody who are trauma informed and autism informed is difficult, but it's so crucial.
Absolutely. Full agreement there. We are at 4:55, 4:56. Looks like my eyes are lying. 4:58. First, before I get into closing up the space, I wanted to say thank you to JD for coming and joining. I know we missed you up controls this week. That's on me, brother. I didn't check in with you and do a good job coordinating. But if you'd like to say anything, I'd love to hear you say hello at least, or just I want to wish you well and give you the opportunity to speak. No pressure to speak. You can just flash a little heart. That's good enough too if you'd like, bro. Thank you for coming by. Cool. All right. So as for this conversation, Homer or Devin, how do you feel about this? Do you feel like there's more you'd like to really explore and cover? I'm sure I could come up with a bunch more questions for next week if necessary. But how do you guys feel about how we did today, Homer?
First off, you never need to ask an autistic person whose special interest is autism if they want to talk about unmasking much, because that's something my wife doesn't want to hear about anymore. So I would love to have an avenue to drop it. I did want to say a couple things before you close down, and very related to what Devin said, that diagnostic criteria for any of the neurodivergent mental health, disability, developmental disability stuff is really hard to nail down. And particularly for people of color and women, again, that lack of access to the care and then the discriminatory practices on top of that make it exponentially harder. The number of autistic women diagnosed has doubled recently, and is still at half the diagnostic rate of men, and there's no reason to think that a brain type would be more or less male or female. There's no such thing as female autism, which was thought of a thing. And based on my research, I had female autism, and I'm cis white male, and I'm fine with that. But I had the exact neurotype and type of autism that would have gone undiagnosed, which essentially high masking due to CPTSD and all that stuff. Again, I also want to reiterate that the traits that autistics have, these are very human traits. Feeling awkward, difficulty speaking, not, going non-speaking for a moment or for a long time. All of these things are very human. So when somebody relates to an autistic person and says, just like Kyle said, oh, isn't it, I've heard, isn't everybody a little bit autistic? Well, we all experience these traits in our life and these experiences. It doesn't mean you're autistic, but it could mean that you're autistic if you experience them in childhood and throughout your life and 100% of the time, and they're disabling because of how society treats those characteristics and traits when they're presented nonstop. And again, that trauma, we're all living through trauma in the last 3 years. Every human in the United States and in the world is currently living through a global pandemic and is going to suffer from CPTSD. So I'm under the assumption that we're all neurodiverse at this point because there was a global pandemic. Having the neurodiverse label typically won't encompass that because that will just piss off the neurotypicals. Anyway, I could always talk more on this, so I will definitely be back someday, or maybe we'll do another space like this, and I'm always excited.
Beautiful. Okay, Devan, how do you feel? Do you feel like I'm starting to think if we do another one next week, for example, I think I'd like to really dive into unmasking deeply, like really understand what unmasking means for each of you guys, and then what it may mean for others, what it may mean for me, what it may mean for somebody who's undiagnosed, may not know they're undiagnosed. Maybe you guys can help give me some more breadcrumbs. How do you guys feel about touching on unmasking more in depth next week?
Like Homer said, I'm always down to talk autism, and psychology, and autistic people love talking psychology and psychoanalyzing. And I think it might be helpful to talk about the experience of unmasking. We've talked a lot about the experience of living as autistic. And then I also am going to, it's too late to pin it, but I'm going to tweet out this list of, quote, unofficial diagnostic criteria. It was initially called the Women Asperger's diagnostic criteria. And then, of course, we don't use Asperger's anymore, and men who experience autism in the less typical way, again, problematic, but a lot of people are finding a lot of helpful information in this list, so I'm going to tweet it out for anyone who wants it. But yes, I'm always open to talking more about this.
Okay, great. Well, if you guys are open, I'd like to schedule for next Sunday at the same time. Kyle, how do you feel? Do you know if you'll have the time next Sunday, same time?
Oh yeah, I'll make it work, man. I learned so much every time we get together. I definitely gotta brush up on terms. That is one thing I'm almost I'm not afraid to speak, but I am afraid of offending. And like my mom's an early childhood educator, and I've heard her, say special needs and refer to people in that way. I didn't even know that was derogatory. So there's maybe we're just behind the times in where we live, or I don't know, but I definitely need to do more research. But yeah, I learn every time I come on, and I appreciate all you guys for everything. It's really enlightening. Thank you.
No, that's perfect. And you know what? I'm the same way when it comes to being concerned about maybe using improper terminology or accidentally offending somebody. Maybe that's another thing we can cover next week if we can include it. Is maybe we can talk about terminology and how the terminology in the space has evolved, as well as what some of the common terms are, what some terms are that may be offensive. Maybe we can come with a list of terms that we know of, and or maybe we can send them via email so we don't offend somebody on here. I don't know, but if you remember, well, I know you remember, but our intention with this space was to make it a safe space for everybody to ask questions, to quote unquote make mistakes if necessary. I'm comfortable making the mistake in public. I'll take the bullet. If you say something that offends somebody, Kyle, let's just say that I said it. I'll take it. But
I'll make a graphic of terms because that's my other special interest, and then we can share it. It'll be pretty.
Oh, so beautiful. And Devin, I know you asked last week about us sharing a post or some information last week, and I didn't circle back with you. If you post, or when you post these things, if you tag me on them or send them to me, I'll definitely repost from my account. I will most likely repost from the NFT Voices account too. I don't think it would be a problem. I don't know if there's a concern about everything being focused on the niche with the account or not. So I do have to check with that, but I'd be happy to tweet from that if it doesn't offend anybody in the crew.
Before we go, I do want to give a shout out to anybody in California. There are 21 California regional centers that do diagnoses if you are requesting services. So I am in a very fortunate position to be living close to one, and I am not going to be charged for my autism assessment, which can get into the thousands upon thousands of dollars. So if you are in California, look for the California Regional Center near you. They typically are associated with child resources, but they do serve adults, and I think that is underutilized or acknowledged. Shaw, don't worry about saying something offensive. With Devan and I here, I'm sure you'll only do it once. And same. I love being held accountable because we don't know we're doing something that's inappropriate if we don't know it's inappropriate. So that open mindset of learning and changing our language, it's ideal. So thanks for having us on again.
No, that's perfect. Thank you for that too. I appreciate hearing that from you. I think both of you have done another amazing job at helping us, especially Kyle and I, come along and make some headway in understanding the topic at hand. We're looking forward to next week. I guess we should go ahead and shut this down. Kyle, do you want to close her out again? I know you said you want to practice. I'm happy to step to the side if you want, bro.
No, I'm good. Would you mind doing it?
No problem.
I'll be happy, man.
Absolutely, man.
Sorry to stop my phone from echoing here. Came in the room, and Kyle, I gotta read off the website just like everybody else too. Let's see how well my reading works this time around, huh? So this has been episode 13 of Mental Maintenance from NFT Voices with our guest Devan Gann of Creative Inova, Homer Reed Jr., one of our NFT voices, one of our fellow voices here. Thank you both for joining us. We were hosted today by Kyle and aka Drip Lord and myself, Shah, aka Dragon's Pitchfork. We were joined by my brother JD. Thanks for joining us, JD. We appreciate you being here with us. We are NFT Voices. We're on a mission to create a thriving community where creative misfits feel empowered to collaborate and drive the narrative in the NFT space by communicating empathetically, collaborating enthusiastically, and putting people before profits. Thank you all for joining us today. We're looking forward to joining again next week, 4:00 p.m. on Sunday, where we will touch on the same topic, but we're going to focus on the unmasking part of this, and we'll get into a little bit on terminology. So again, thank you everybody for joining us today. Anybody listening to the recording, thanks for listening to us. We hope to see you on next week's space. You guys have a good one. Kyle, I'll talk to you in a few, bro.
Yeah, man, thank you.
All right, take care, guys. Have a good one. timing on that was impeccable. As soon as I hit the dial button, it rang.
Awesome. Yeah,
Yeah,
man. Thanks for that. You you carried my weight there for sure.
not at all. I think we all balance each other. It's been nice when you carried it for me too, man. So I think it's just